Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. We love getting into these stories, and today we're going to zero in on a really potent section of Genesis.
Yeah, chapters 16 through 20.
Exactly 5 chapters that are just packed with these huge foundational narratives, the kind that just echo throughout the whole text.
I mean, you're talking about Hagar and Ishmael, the covenant with Abraham, the promise of Isaac, Sodom, and Gomorrah, Abraham and Abimelech.
Yeah, it's a lot, and we're going to try to really unpack it, go beyond just listing the events and get to what they mean, why they matter, and maybe point out some details that are easily missed on a casual read.
Absolutely. And we're sticking with the text itself here, excerpts straight from Genesis, so we can really ground our conversation in the source material.
Right, so let's dive in, starting with Hagar and Ishmael, Genesis 16.
Sure.
We meet Sarai, who's dealing with barrenness, a really difficult situation, especially back then. And she suggests to Abram a solution that reflects their cultural context.
Yeah, she proposes that Abram have a child with Hagar, her Egyptian handmaid.
It's a window into how important lineage and heirs were back then. And, Sarai's taking matters into her own hands, trying to maybe even force God's hand, which is a really interesting theme that pops up again and again.
It certainly does, and it doesn't go exactly as planned, right? Hagar conceives, and that changes things fast.
Definitely. The text says when Hagar realized she was pregnant, her mistress was despised in her eyes, so there's this immediate tension.
A power shift.
Exactly. And Sarai blames Abram, saying, "My wrong be upon thee." And Abram basically says, "Look, your mate is in your hand. Do what you want." And, well, Sarai deals harshly with Hagar, so harshly she runs away.
Picture that alone, pregnant, fleeing into the wilderness.
It's a powerful image.
Yeah.
And it's in the wilderness by a fountain that she encounters the angel of the Lord, who asks her these pointed questions, "Whence camest thou? And whither wilt thou go?" forcing her to really confront her situation.
A moment of reckoning almost, and the angel's instructions are kind of unexpected, right?
Totally. Instead of saying, "Go make a new life for yourself," Hagar is told to return to thy mistress and submit thyself under her hands. That seems so difficult, especially now.
It's a tough one to hear for sure, but remember, this is within a specific social context. The household structure was really important. Maybe this emphasizes that interconnectedness, but then it goes even further.
Right. There's this incredible prophecy. Hagar is told that her descendants will be uncountable, a vast multitude, and her son will be named Ishmael, which means God has heard your affliction.
So even in this command to return, there's this recognition of her suffering and this amazing promise for the future.
But it doesn't stop there. The angel also says he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. And that's quite a description.
Yeah, a real foreshadowing there. And it's been interpreted in various ways, often linked to the nomadic peoples of the Arabian Peninsula. But the seeming contradiction is fascinating, this promise of so many descendants, and yet a life of conflict.
It makes you think about how divine promises work, how they can play out in ways we might not expect. And Hagar responds by naming God, "Thou God seest me."
A powerful recognition that even in her pain and isolation she is seen. She's not forgotten. She even names the well Bir Lahairoi, which means well of the living one who sees me.
And finally, Ishmael is born to Abram when he's 86 years old, a father at last, but not through Sarai, not in the way they probably imagine.
Right, and that's important. It shows how human actions can intersect with God's plans, sometimes in unexpected ways.
So then we jump ahead 13 years to Genesis 17, and things really shift.
Yeah.
It's the establishment of the covenant with Abraham, who's now 99 years old, and God appears to him and says, I am the Almighty God, walk before me and be thou perfect. That's setting the bar pretty high right from the start.
No kidding. And remember, a covenant here is like a binding agreement. This is a huge deal, a formal pact between God and humanity with specific obligations and promises. It's the foundation for so much of what comes next.
Okay, so what are the terms?
Well, God promises to multiply Abraham, exceedingly make him the father of many nations. Abram's name is even changed to Abraham, which means father of a multitude. It's like a constant reminder of the promise.
And there's more, right?
Way more. God says Abraham will be fruitful, nations will come from him, kings will come from him, and it's an everlasting covenant with him and his descendants, and they're promised the land of Canaan as an everlasting possession. This is a massive declaration with huge implications for the future.
And then there's this physical sign of the covenant circumcision for every male child. It's a permanent mark of belonging to this relationship with God, and the consequences for not doing it are serious. The text says that soul shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant.
And that practice of circumcision has continued to this day, right? In both Judaism and Islam, it goes straight back to this moment.
And in this same ceremony, Sarai's name is changed too to Sarah, meaning princess. And she's promised a son specifically through her that this covenant will continue.
Right now it's getting specific.
And what's Abraham's reaction?
He laughs.
He laughs out loud.
Yeah, he falls on his face and laughs. He's thinking, shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old, and shall Sarah that is 90 years old bear? I mean, it's understandable, right?
Totally. It
Yeah.
seems impossible, and yet, even in that moment of doubt, Abraham makes this heartfelt plea about Ishmael, that Ishmael might live before thee. He clearly loves his son, and maybe he's worried about his future now.
Right. What's Ishmael's place in all of this? And God responds directly, Sarah will bear Isaac. And it is through Isaac that the covenant will be established.
So Ishmael is not the heir, but God doesn't forget him.
No, God blesses Ishmael too and reiterates the promise of numerous descendants, 12 princes, a great nation. So he's still within God's plan, even if it's a different path. And then we get a specific timeline for Isaac's birth at this set time in the next year.
And Abraham's response to all this is immediate action. He circumcises Ishmael, and every male in his household that same day says he took Ishmael his son, and all that were born in his house, and all that were bought with his money, every male among the men of Abraham's house, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskin in the selfsame day as God had said unto him.
Total commitment right there. No hesitation.
And their ages are specifically mentioned again. Abraham was 99 and Ishmael was 13. It really emphasizes that this command applied to everyone and was put into practice right away.
No delays. Okay, so moving on to Genesis 18, we see a shift in scene. The Lord appears to Abraham again, this time in the plains of Mamre, but not alone. He's with two others.
3 men show up, and Abraham's reaction is amazing. He's so hospitable, bowing low, addressing them as my Lord, and insisting that they stay and let him take care of them.
Yeah, the detail in this passage is striking. He offers water for their feet, rest under a tree, a full meal. He tells Sarah to bake cakes. He personally prepares a calf. He stands by them as they eat. It's a picture of going above and beyond.
It really is.
Yeah.
And some see it as an example of ideal hospitality, those cultural values of honor and generosity. But there's also this sense of reverence, especially since one of these visitors is understood to be the Lord himself.
Right. Abraham's not just being polite. He's humbled. He's serving.
So as they're eating, the visitors ask about Sarah, and one of them reiterates the promise of a son, I will certainly return unto thee, according to the time of life and life. Lol, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. And Sarah, who's listening from inside the tent, she laughs.
She can't believe it. She thinks, after I am waxed old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also.
It's a human reaction, right?
Totally. This promise seems utterly impossible. And her laughter, even though it's private, God hears it and says to Abraham, wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I of a surety bear a child, which am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord?
A powerful reminder that nothing is impossible for God. And despite Sarah denying it out of fear, the promise stands firm. But then the narrative takes this turn. We learn about the coming judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah. God reveals to Abraham that the outcry against these cities is huge because of their sin. Why do you think God shares this with Abraham?
Well, it shows a deepening of their relationship. God is confiding in Abraham, and it's tied to Abraham's purpose. He's told he will become a great and powerful nation, a blessing to all nations, and he will instruct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. So he's got this big responsibility, this integral role in God's plan for humanity.
And then we get to one of the most famous dialogues in the Bible, Abraham's intercession for Sodom. He starts by asking, wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked? A question rooted in justice, and then he negotiates with God step by step, lowering the number of righteous people needed to spare the city from 50 all the way down to 10.
It's amazing, Rick, this back and forth with God, Abraham's persistence, his moral argument, shall not the judge of all the earth do right? It shows his growing sense of justice, his boldness in appealing to God's character.
And while Sodom isn't spared in the end, it's still this incredible example of God engaging with human concerns, listening to Abraham's pleas, considering even a small number of righteous people.
And it shows how Abraham's relationship with God is evolving. It's not just about obedience anymore. It's deeper, more questioning.
And that brings us to Genesis 19, the actual destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. 2 angels arrive, and Lot, Abraham's nephew, shows them hospitality just like Abraham did earlier.
But the vibe in Sodom is completely different. The city's wickedness is on full display when the men surround Lot's house and demand that he bring out his guests so they can know them.
And that phrase, know them, in this context, it means they want to have sex with them. It's a clear sign of how depraved the city has become.
Yeah, and Lot's response is disturbing to modern readers. He offers his own virgin daughters to the mob, saying, behold, now I have 2 daughters which have not known man. Let me I pray you bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes, only unto these men do nothing.
It's shocking, and it shows how different things were back then, the extreme pressure to protect guests, even at a terrible cost.
Right, hospitality was an absolute obligation, and for Lot, his guest's safety came first no matter what. But the angels intervene, they pull Lot back inside and strike the crowd with blindness. It's divine protection in action.
Then they warn Lot that the city is about to be destroyed, but even then there's disbelief. Lot's sons-in-law think he's joking. It's only through the angels' insistence urging them to flee, even physically leading them out, that Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters escape.
And the command is very clear: escape for thy life, look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain, escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed.
Run for your lives and don't look back. But Lot begs to go to a nearby town, Zoar, and he's allowed to do that. So even in this judgment, there's a bit of mercy.
And then the destruction itself is swift and total. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the plain.
Complete devastation, and tragically Lot's wife disobeys. She looks back and is instantly turned into a pillar of salt.
A permanent reminder of the consequences of disobedience.
And the next morning, Abraham sees the smoke rising from the plain, confirming what's happened. And the text specifically says God remembered Abraham in saving Lot.
So Lot and his daughters are safe, but their situation is still really bleak. They end up living in a cave in the mountains, and what happens next is truly disturbing.
Yeah, Lot's daughters, thinking they're the last people left and desperate to continue their lineage, they get Lot drunk and have children with him, resulting in the births of Moab and Benami, who become the ancestors of the Moabites and Ammonites.
It's a dark and difficult story illustrating the depths of despair and the brokenness that can result from such trauma and loss.
Finally, we get to Genesis 20, where Abraham travels to Gerar and does something we've seen before. He tells Abimelech, the king of Gerar, that Sarah is his sister, just like he did with Pharaoh in Egypt, and as a result, Abimelech takes Sarah.
Yeah, the repetition of this deception raises questions about Abraham's faith. He has this covenant with God, yet he still resorts to lying out of fear.
But God intervenes again, this time through a dream, warning Abimelech that he's in danger because Sarah is married.
And Abimelech, who hasn't touched Sarah, pleads his innocence, saying both Abraham and Sarah claim they were siblings.
And God acknowledges Abimelech's integrity, saying he prevented him from sinning, and then commands him to return Sarah to Abraham, who is called a prophet for the first time, whose prayers can save Abimelech.
So Abraham's status is being elevated here.
And Abimelech acts immediately. He confronts Abraham, demanding an explanation. And Abraham's defense is interesting. He says he was afraid because there's no fear of God in this place, meaning he saw Gerar as immoral. And he points out that Sarah is technically his half-sister. They have the same father, but a different mother.
So he's trying to justify his lie by saying it's partially true.
And he reveals that he's told Sarah to call him her brother wherever they go. It seems like this was his standard strategy.
Interesting, right? And Abimelech responds with generosity. He returns. Sarah, unharmed, gives Abraham sheep, oxen, servants, and permission to live anywhere in his land. He even gives Sarah 1,000 pieces of silver as a covering of the eyes.
What's the meaning of that gift?
It's open to interpretation, but it's often seen as both compensation for the potential dishonor Sarah faced and a public acknowledgement that silences any gossip. It's about restoring her honor and keeping the peace.
And the chapter ends with Abraham praying for Abimelech and his household, and as a result, God heals them, allowing them to have children again because their wombs had been closed because of Sarah. So we see Abraham's power as a prophet. His prayers are effective.
So much happens in these 5 chapters.
I know, right? We've got barrenness and the birth of Ishmael, the covenant, and the promise of Isaac, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and all this complexity with Abraham and Abimelech.
And we see these recurring themes of faith and doubt, human action versus divine plan, judgment, and mercy. These stories are grappling with huge questions about humanity and God, the difficulty of waiting for promises, the consequences of our choices.
Yeah, and some details that really stood out to me, the specific prophecy about Ishmael's nature, Sarah's laughter when she hears the promise, Abraham arguing with God over Sodom Lot's wife turning into salt, and the whole disturbing story of Lot and his daughters.
They're powerful images and challenging stories, and they make you think about how promises work, how they can unfold in unexpected ways. How do we understand God's justice and mercy working together, and what does it all say about human nature?
So as you go back and reread these chapters, consider this. What do these stories, with all their messy details and difficult moments, teach us about the nature of promises, both divine and human, and how do they challenge us to think about our own relationship with faith and doubt with obedience and consequence.
It's a text that rewards deep thinking, that raises questions that still resonate today.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's been insightful and thought-provoking. Until next time.
Thanks, everyone.